Welcome to POV Stories. Stay with this one. It earns it. She doesn't cry. That's the first thing you notice. Most people, in your experience, cry when something enormous arrives unexpectedly. Claire doesn't. She stands in the bathroom doorway of her hackney flat on a Friday evening in October holding a pregnancy test with both hands, and she looks at you with an expression that is completely, terrifyingly steady. The expression of someone who has already moved past the shock into the territory of what happens next, which has always been her instinct, which is one of the first things you loved about her, and which right now, standing in her kitchen in your socks with the pasta water coming to a boil, behind you, is the most frightening thing you have ever seen on another person's face. She sets the test on the counter beside the olive oil. She crosses her arms. She says, "I've done 3. They're all the same." And you understand, looking at her, that this is not the beginning of the conversation. This is the middle of it. She has already had the first half alone, in the bathroom, for the past 20 minutes while you made pasta and listened to a podcast about cryptocurrency that you were not really listening to. She has already had the fear and the disbelief and whatever came after the disbelief, and she has organized all of it into the particular composed directness she brings to everything that matters. And now she is standing in the kitchen waiting to see what version of yourself you are going to bring to the second half. You are 31 years old. You are from Columbus, Ohio. You have been in London for 2 years on a work visa that is valid for another 18 months, employed by a fintech startup that has pivoted twice and is currently doing something with blockchain that you described to people back home as basically a more complicated version of what it used to be. You have a flat in Bermondsey that you have been imperfectly making habitable since you arrived. You have been with Claire Whitmore for 14 months. You know she takes her tea with oat milk and no sugar and considers this the rational position. You know she reads The Guardian every morning on her phone while eating toast standing up because she finds sitting down for breakfast performative. You know she is a secondary school geography teacher in Islington who talks about her year 9s the way other people talk about complicated relatives, with love and exasperation and something that is clearly pride even when it presents as complaint. You know she grew up in Shropshire and left at 18 with the specific forward momentum of someone who has decided that forward is the only useful direction. You have known all of these things for 14 months. What you don't know yet is what they add up to, which is what the next several months are going to teach you whether you are ready or not. You say, "Okay." She says, "I need to know where your head is. Not what do you want? Not what are we going to do? Where is your head?" You have been in England long enough to understand that this is not the same question as the ones it resembles. It is more specific than that. It is a request for location, not opinion. She wants to know where you actually are, not what you theoretically feel, because she has learned through experience that feelings without location are not particularly useful. You tell her your head is with her. She looks at you for a long time with the assessing expression she gets when she is deciding whether something is real or performed. You have seen this expression before, when you told her you liked cricket after watching 2 matches with her brother Will, and she spent 45 seconds deciding whether you were sincere or socially accommodating. This is a longer 45 seconds. Then she nods once and says, "That's a start." And she uncrosses her arms and comes and sits at the kitchen table, and you sit across from her, and the pasta overcooks by 7 minutes while you talk, and you eat it anyway at midnight without discussing the pasta at all. The conversation is the most honest one you have ever had in a kitchen. Not because you say things you have never said, but because you say things you have never been required to locate with this precision. Where you are, what you intend, what you understand about what you are agreeing to. She wants to keep it. She says this directly, without preface, having clearly decided before sitting down that there was no productive version of approaching this from the side. You say you are in. She says, "Being in isn't enough. Being in is the minimum." You ask what she means. She says, "It means you understand what this is. Not just a baby. This." She gestures at the space between you, at the kitchen, at the window with London going on outside. This. All of this. Because if you're doing this, you're doing all of this. You tell her you understand. She looks at you. She says, You understand in the way that you understand things at midnight in a kitchen. Let's see if you still understand it in the morning. You do. You understand it more in the morning, actually, because the morning has a weight to it that the midnight kitchen did not, a clarity, a there-ness. You are still in the flat. The pasta is still in the pot on the stove. The test is still on the counter. And you are still in. You make her tea with oat milk and no sugar, and no discussion of whether this is the rational position, and she comes into the kitchen in her dressing gown and looks at you standing at the kettle, and something in her face does something that she controls almost immediately but that you see, which is the thing you always see because you have been paying attention, which is what you have been doing for 14 months without quite knowing you were doing it. Her parents are Roger and Diane Whitmore. They live in Ludlow, Shropshire, in a stone-built house 3 streets from the river Teme that Roger grew up in and that has been lived in by the same family for long enough that the house has stopped being just a house and become an argument about how to spend a life. The garden, the Sunday lunches, the piano lessons Diane gives to village children on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, the crossword Roger does in pen. The complete shelf of Diane's historical fiction organized by period. Claire has a younger brother, Will, 28. Who lives in Edinburgh and works in logistics and who appears at Christmas and bank holidays with the cheerful self-sufficiency of a younger sibling who figured out early that the family would carry on without his management. Claire calls her mother on Saturday morning. You are in the next room on her couch with a cup of coffee and can hear only the frequency of it, the particular music of a daughter and mother navigating something large together while also navigating it separately. It lasts 26 minutes. When Claire comes out, her expression is the expression of someone who has done a hard thing and found it was slightly less hard than anticipated. She says, "Mom wants to meet you properly. Dad will have questions." You ask what kind of questions. She considers this with genuine seriousness, as if consulting an internal inventory of her father. She says, "Sensible ones." The drive to Ludlow is 2.5 hours on a Sunday in November. Claire drives. It is her car and her county and her family, and in this context these facts arrange themselves without discussion. You take the M40 out of London and somewhere past Oxford the city becomes the country, which in England happens suddenly, one moment motorway, the next moment fields, as if the country has interrupted a conversation the city was having with itself. The sky is low and grey and specific, the particular grey of an English November that Americans either find oppressive or find, after sufficient time, to have a quality of its own. You have been here long enough to find it has a quality of its own. You bring a burgundy. The man at the off-license in Hackney said it was right for a Sunday lunch with someone's parents in Shropshire, and you chose to believe him. You are not second-guessing the wine. You are second-guessing the shirt, and the shoes, and whether beginning every answer with a slight uptick that makes it sound like a question, an American habit you have not yet fully trained out of yourself, is going to be the thing that sinks you before you've sat down. Claire has given you a briefing. Not a script, a briefing, because she knows the difference, and respects the difference. She has told you her father will ask about your work and your intentions and your plans, and she has told you to answer directly because he does not respond well to hedging, which is what he spent 30 years as a solicitor training himself to recognize and dismiss. She has told you her mother will be warm and that the warmth is genuine, and that you should not mistake it for unconditional, because it isn't. She has told you that the Sunday lunch is not a casual thing, that it is a structure, that showing up at a Whitmore Sunday lunch and performing ease while not actually being at ease is less sustainable than simply allowing yourself to be at ease, which is advice she gives you with the slightly amused expression of someone who has watched this challenge defeat people before. You ask if anyone specific has failed the Sunday lunch test. She looks at the road. She says, "That's not relevant." The way she says it confirms the answer is yes. Ludlow is what you imagined and then more particular than the imagining. A medieval town that is matter-of-fact about its own medievalness. A castle on a hill that appears to have simply always been there. A market square. A church whose tower arrives at the end of every second street as if the town has organized itself around keeping it in view. Roger and Diane's house has a low stone wall and a front garden with the careful attention of someone who treats gardening as a form of thinking. There is a rose bush that has been properly put to bed for winter. You notice this and file it. Roger opens the door. He is tall, early 60s, silver-haired, wearing a navy jumper over a collared shirt which you register as deliberately not formal, which is its own form of formality. He shakes your hand with a firm brief grip and looks at you, not the quick social scan of a first meeting but a real look, the look of someone who has been forming a question for several weeks and is now beginning to collect the data to answer it. He says, "Come in, then. Diane's just finishing up in the kitchen." He steps back. You step in. The house smells of Sunday, roasting meat and something with onions and the particular warm, settled smell of a home that has been a home for a very long time. Diane appears from the kitchen almost immediately, wiping her hands on a tea towel, and she is not what you expected, which is your own failure of imagination because you should have expected exactly this. A woman of 58 with Claire's eyes and Claire's particular quality of attention, warm in a way that is genuine and specific rather than performed, who says your name when she greets you, not a generic welcome but your name, Marcus, which means she has been saying it in her head and has decided on the version of it she is going to use. She says, "Lovely to properly meet you. Go through, go through." And she gestures toward the sitting room and is already back in the kitchen before you have fully processed the greeting. The sitting room has a fireplace with a real fire, which is either very English or very Shropshire or very Roger, possibly all three. There are bookshelves on either side of the chimney breast, organized in a way that suggests a system. There are family photographs on the mantelpiece, including one of Claire at what looks like a school sports day, 8 years old, winning something, already with that expression, the focused, forward-looking expression of someone who has decided. Will arrives 20 minutes after you, having driven from the train station, and he shakes your hand with the cheerful energy of someone who has decided to like you provisionally, and is looking for confirmation, and he says, "All right, the American," which would be obnoxious from anyone else and from him is affectionate, which you understand immediately, which he notices that you understand, which is the beginning of the friendship. Roger and you talk over pre-lunch drinks, a sherry that you accept because declining would be the wrong move in this house and that you discover you do not hate. He asks about your work without asking about your salary, which is the English version of establishing means. He asks about your family in Columbus, not what they do but what they are like, which is a more sophisticated question and one that requires a more honest answer. You tell him about your parents, both teachers, your father high school history, your mother elementary school art, a house in the suburbs that felt enormous when you were small and normal-sized on visits home, a childhood that was good in the particular American Midwestern way of good childhoods, community-oriented, sports-adjacent, adequately churched without being oppressively so. Roger listens with the focused attention of a man who has spent his career distinguishing between what people say and what they mean, and he asks follow-up questions that demonstrate he was listening, which is both reassuring and slightly nerve-wracking because it means he is actually processing everything you give him. He does not ask about your intentions directly. He asks, instead, about your plans, where you see yourself in 3 years, whether you intend to stay in London, whether the visa situation is something you are managing or something that is managing you. These are the sensible questions Claire promised. You answer them as directly as you can, which means acknowledging the uncertainties. The visa is up for renewal, the startup is not guaranteed, 3 years from now is not something you can blueprint, but that the intention is to stay, that you have been building something in London that feels like the beginning of a life rather than the continuation of a temporary situation. He listens. He nods. He does not tell you whether the answers are sufficient. He refills your sherry. The Sunday lunch is an event in the full meaning of the word. Roast chicken with all the relevant accompaniments, a gravy that Diane has been making for decades and that has the particular depth of something perfected through repetition. There is bread sauce, which is new to you and which you approach with cautious respect. There is a roasted cauliflower that Will defends as unnecessary and Claire defends as essential in a disagreement that has clearly happened many times before and functions less as a debate and more as a ritual the family conducts to establish that nothing has changed. The lunch lasts 2 hours. You contribute to several conversations and sit out of several others and ask Diane about one of the periods covered in her historical fiction shelf and spend 20 minutes in a conversation about the Wars of the Roses that you had not expected to have and that turns out to be genuinely interesting and that Diane conducts with the particular pleasure of someone encountering unexpected enthusiasm for her subject. After lunch, Roger asks if you'd like to see the garden. You know what this means. Claire catches your eye across the table with the expression of someone who is not going to intervene, which is both supportive and clarifying. You say you'd love to see the garden. You follow Roger out through the kitchen, past Diane's piano with its scatter of children's sheet music, out through the back door into the November Shropshire garden. It is cold and grey and the garden is in its winter state, beds cut back, the lawn soft underfoot, the bare arms of a climbing rose on the back wall. Roger moves through it with the ease of someone for whom this space is an extension of his thinking, pointing out things that will come back in spring, the hellebores, the clematis, the kitchen garden along the far wall. He is not performing the garden. He is sharing it. There is a difference, and you have been in England long enough to understand it. Then he stops by the far wall and looks at it for a moment in the way Carmela looked at the grapevine in November, not at you, at the thing he tends. He says, Claire doesn't need someone to manage things for her. She's been managing things for herself since she was 18. What she needs is someone who understands that and stays anyway. He does not look at you while he says it. He looks at the wall where the rose is bare and structured against the stone. He says, The question I have, the only question, really, is not whether you're capable. It's whether you're intending to be here for the long thing. Not the interesting part. The long thing. He picks up a pair of secateurs from the edge of a planter and makes one small cut to a stem that needed it. He says, Because she'll manage either way. She always does. But it's different if someone's there. You stand in the November garden in Shropshire with the grey sky above the stone wall, and you think about the kitchen in Hackney on a Friday evening and the pasta boiling and the test on the counter beside the olive oil, and the look on her face that was terrifying because it was so steady. You think about the morning after, the tea with oat milk, her expression when you were still there. You think about what managing either way actually costs a person, which is something Roger knows because he has watched it for 30 years and which you are beginning to understand from 14 months of paying attention. You tell him you intend to be there for the long thing. The words come out without stumbling. He looks at you then, properly, the full assessment, and he nods once with the precision of a man who spent his career deciding what was true and what was not, and he hands you the secateur and says, That stem there. Go on then. And you make the cut he indicates, badly, and he nods at it anyway, and you go back inside. The months that follow are their own kind of education. The pregnancy proceeds with the matter-of-fact efficiency of something that has been decided and is now simply happening. Claire continues teaching. She continues the Tuesday evening ceramics class she has been attending for 3 years, which she describes as meditation with clay, and which produces objects of genuine quality that she dismisses as practice pieces. She finishes a geography scheme of work she has been developing for the department for 2 terms, on a deadline that does not adjust for morning sickness, because she is Claire and the deadline does not adjust. She does not complain about the morning sickness. She describes it once as inconvenient, which is the most she will say. You move into the Hackney flat in February, the 2 of you, properly, your Bermondsey flat sublet, your boxes carried up 3 flights in the rain on a Saturday with Will, who drove down from Edinburgh specifically for the move and who spends most of the day asking you questions about American football with the specific enthusiasm of someone who has done research in order to have a conversation. You carry boxes. You build furniture. You argue, mildly, about where the bookshelf should go, which is the first argument you have in the flat as a shared flat, and which resolves when Claire points out that her books need to be accessible from the reading chair and that this is not actually a negotiable variable, and you say okay and move the bookshelf. This is, you will understand later, the template for most of the arguments that follow. She has thought about it more thoroughly than you have, and when you recognize this, the right move is simply to acknowledge it. The first time you meet her friends as a couple who is having a baby rather than a couple is a dinner party in Stoke Newington hosted by her friend Rosie, who teaches English at a school in Tottenham and who has the particular quality of warmth that comes from genuinely preferring other people to herself, which is rarer than it sounds. There are 6 people at the table, all of whom have known Claire for varying lengths of time and all of whom have formed opinions about you before you arrived, which is what happens when your girlfriend has good friends who pay attention. You are assessed over the course of the evening through conversation, which is the British version of a background check, your opinions solicited, your responses evaluated, your willingness to be wrong about something measured against your willingness to defend what you believe. You get the sense, somewhere around the second bottle of wine, that you are passing, not because you are performing well but because you have stopped performing. You have just been yourself, which turns out to be enough, which is both relieving and slightly embarrassing, that you spent 2 hours worrying about something that resolved through the abandonment of the worry. Claire watches you from across the table through most of this and does not intervene and does not rescue and does not perform anything on your behalf, which is the thing you most needed her not to do and which she understood without being told. When you leave, she takes your hand on the street outside and says, "You were fine." In Claire's vocabulary, this is a significant endorsement. You have learned to calibrate her scale. You call your parents in Columbus. Your mother picks up and your father gets on the extension, which is what they do when something is important, and you tell them. Your mother's response is immediate and complete. She is happy, she is worried, she is full of questions, she is already planning a visit. She asks about healthcare in the UK with the specific anxiety of an American mother who understands that American healthcare is not the baseline against which all other systems should be measured and who wants to understand exactly what the NHS will and will not provide before she allows herself to be reassured. Your father says less and means more. He asks if you are sure about staying in England. You say yes. He says, "All right." A pause. Then, "She sounds like she has it together." You say she very much does. He says, "That's the thing." And you understand that this is your father telling you he approves in the specific compressed language of a man who was taught that approval is expressed through trust rather than declaration. The NHS appointment system is not what you expected it to be, which is to say it is not what an American imagines when an American imagines universal healthcare. It is not utopian, it is not seamless. It has its particular inefficiencies and its particular moments of bureaucratic density, but it covers everything, which is the thing that keeps arriving at you with fresh weight every time you think about it. The midwife is called Janet. She is 50-something, no-nonsense, Yorkshire by origin, and she speaks to Claire with the direct respect of someone who understands that the woman in front of her has done her research and requires information rather than management. She converts things for you when necessary without being asked, which is the specific competence of a midwife who has dealt with international couples and has decided that making someone feel foreign inside a medical appointment is not useful. Roger calls you on a Thursday evening in March. You have not spoken on the phone since the garden. The call is unexpected and brief. He says he has been reading about American visa regulations for spousal applications and wants to make sure you are aware of the timeline requirements because they are not straightforward and it would be useful for you to have a solicitor look at them early. He says this not as an intrusion but as the specific practical gesture of a retired solicitor who has decided to apply his skills on your behalf, which is, you understand after you hang up, the most significant thing he could have done, because it means he has decided you are something worth protecting with his professional knowledge. You sit with this for a while. Then you call Claire and tell her what he said. She is quiet for a moment. She says, "That's Dad." 2 words that contain everything. The scan image goes on the fridge. This is Claire's decision. You would have put it somewhere more private, a drawer, a bedside table, and the particular American instinct to keep intimate things intimate. She puts it on the fridge with a magnet that says Shropshire Hills AONB, and she looks at it every morning when she gets the oat milk, and this is how she is in the world, present with things rather than private about them, and you find, after a few days, that looking at it in the morning has become something you do too, this small gray image of a question mark in a gray sea, which is in this kitchen on this fridge in this flat in Hackney, and is also somehow the most real thing you have seen in 2 years of living in London. Diane sends a package in April. It arrives in a box carefully wrapped, inside which are several items: a hand-knitted yellow cardigan of the kind that requires a specific kind of love to make, wrapped in tissue paper. A book about first-year development that Diane has annotated in the margins with small precise notes, from her own experience. Claire was like this, or this was different with Will. A letter in Diane's handwriting on cream notepaper that begins "Dear Marcus," and which you read 3 times and which you do not tell Claire you read 3 times. The letter says, among other things, that Roger and she are glad, genuinely glad, and that they have been watching you and that what they see is someone who is paying attention, which she says is rarer than it sounds, and that paying attention is the beginning of everything that matters. She signs it Diane, with her name written in the particular careful handwriting of someone who was taught to write properly and has kept the habit. You put the letter in your wallet. It stays there. Will drives down the weekend before the due date. He appears on Friday evening with a bag and a bottle of scotch, and the specific relaxed energy of a younger sibling who has decided his role in this weekend is to be useful without being heavy about it. He takes you to the pub on Friday night, just the 2 of you, Claire having gone to bed early, and he sits across from you with his pint and he says, without preamble, "She's chosen well. Just so you know. She doesn't do things carelessly. If she's chosen you, she's actually chosen you." You say thank you? He says. Don't thank me. I'm telling you so you know the weight of it. Then he finishes his pint and orders another and asks about the NBA playoffs, and you spend an hour talking about basketball, and the scotch stays unopened on the counter of the Hackney flat for the rest of the weekend because it is for after. Clara arrives on a Wednesday morning in May at 7:42, which is, will later say, exactly the right time, early enough to be inconvenient, late enough to be manageable. She weighs 3 kilograms 400 grams. She has Claire's mouth, and, you are told by everyone in the room, your eyes, which is both specific and impossible to verify in the first hour. The berth is in the Homerton, which is close enough to the flat that you drive it in 11 minutes on roads that are just beginning to carry the day's traffic. Claire is extraordinary through all of it in the way that is not surprising because you know her, but that is overwhelming anyway, because knowing that someone is extraordinary and watching them be extraordinary in a delivery room at 7 in the morning are 2 different kinds of knowing. The midwife who delivers Clara is called Priya. She works with the focused practical warmth of someone doing a hard and important job and doing it very well. When Clara arrives, Priya places her on Claire's chest and Claire says, "Hello you," in the specific quiet voice of someone meeting someone they have been waiting to meet. You are standing at Claire's shoulder and you look at the small face of your daughter and you feel, in the sudden absolute way of something you cannot prepare for, that you have arrived somewhere. Not at a destination, at a place from which the rest of it starts. The rest of it. All of it. The long thing. Roger and Diane arrive that afternoon. Roger shakes your hand with both of his, a 2-handed shake, which from a man who uses gesture economically is a significant deployment of warmth. He stands at the foot of the bed and looks at his granddaughter in Claire's arms with an expression that is entirely unguarded, which you have not seen on his face before, which makes you understand something about him that the garden in November did not. He does not touch Clara immediately. He waits until Claire offers her, which she does, and then he holds her with the careful, capable grip of a man who has done this before and remembers how, and he looks at her for a long time without saying anything, and then he looks at you across the room and nods, once, the same nod as the garden, but different, less about assessment and more about something that has been settled permanently, which is that you are here. You are in the long thing, and the long thing has begun. Diane holds Clara and cries, which she does without embarrassment, and then she tells you the yellow cardigan will fit in about 3 weeks, which is practical and also the most loving thing she could say, because it means she is already thinking 3 weeks ahead, which means she is already imagining the 3 weeks, which means she is fully in. Will opens the scotch that evening. 4 of you in the Hackney flat, Clara asleep in the crib in the next room, the May evening doing something generous outside the window, the particular golden hour that London produces in May when you have nearly stopped believing it will come back. You drink a small measure each, even Diane, who rarely drinks, and Roger makes a toast that is 3 sentences long and contains no sentiment, and all of it, which is how Roger does things. 8 weeks later, you are in the Hackney flat at 2 in the morning with Clara against your chest, doing the loop that becomes the structure of your life at this hour. Counter to window, window to counter, the sodium light from the street below doing its particular orange thing on the ceiling. Claire is asleep. You took this shift. You are in the specific altered state of 2 in the morning sleep deprivation, which is not quite the same as any other altered state, which produces its own clarity. A stripping away of everything except what is immediately true. What is immediately true? A flat in Hackney that is yours now in the complete sense. A woman asleep in the next room who said that's a start, and meant it as the most serious thing she had said to you. A daughter against your chest who weighs, currently, 4 kilograms and 100 grams and whose grip on your finger is stronger than it looks and does not feel like a reflex. A letter from Diane in your wallet that you have read more times than you will tell anyone. A rose bed in a Shropshire garden that will come back in spring. A solicitor in Ludlow who made one quiet phone call about visa timelines because he decided you were worth protecting with his knowledge. You did not plan any of the specific shapes of this. You came for a job. You stayed because the city made you feel like one of many. You met someone who could locate herself precisely and expected the same from you, and who one Friday evening in October set a pregnancy test on the counter beside the olive oil and crossed her arms and waited to see what version of yourself you were going to bring to the conversation. You brought the true version, eventually. It took a kitchen table and a midnight pasta and a November garden and a man with secateurs asking about the long thing. It took a Sunday lunch and a sherry and a 20-minute conversation about the Wars of the Roses and a 2-handed handshake in a hospital corridor, and a scotch opened in May by a younger brother who said she's chosen well, just so you know. You look out the window at the London street. It is 2 in the morning and the city is doing what it always does, continuing, at its own frequency, indifferent and enormous and somehow also home. Clara's hand opens and closes around your finger. The grip tightens. You do not move. This is the long thing. You are here. If this one landed somewhere true, subscribe to POV Stories. Every story is written to find the thing you haven't had words for yet. The next one is already waiting.